You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the On the Road Rapid Response episode of the Big Cast. And my name's John Best, coming to you live from Interstate 840, where I've pulled off on the side of the road because we think this topic that we're about to discuss is pretty important. And with me is the most important man on this podcast, and my friend, who I just drove by his house not too long ago, I think, Glenn Sarvati. Hey, Glenn.
Yeah, we should give me a little bit more notice. I might have actually been home to say hi, or at least wave to you from the road or something.
Well, it was one of those things. I try to keep a low profile when I'm traveling. I don't want to be, this podcast is so famous. I don't want to be accosted while I'm, out and about.
And there's just not enough going on these days, too. It's just kind
of no, very little going on for us to talk about. But this is a rapid response episode, but I think you have immediate rapid news that we need to start with before we get into the bigger thing we're going to talk about, which is DeepSeek.
Yeah, well, the AI one was what drove this. And then as we were getting together, I just saw another headline that popped up. We've been talking a lot about the Illinois interchange saga, the Interchange Fee Prohibition Act that was passed by the Illinois legislature, which would prevent interchange to be charged on taxes and gratuities. It is currently under a restraining order, a partial restraining order, let's say. Just saw this, and we'll post a link. Digital Transactions Magazine just wrote an article. Apparently, a bill has now been introduced in the 2025 legislature in Illinois that basically is a one-sentence bill, and it rescinds the Interchange Fee Prohibition Act. Now, it hasn't gone to a vote yet, but it has been introduced. And as the article explains, and this is something that we've been saying from when we first heard about this, some of the legislators who did vote for it are now going, wait a second, we didn't really have time to read this, and this doesn't make a lot of sense. And so they are having second thoughts. The other thing that was mentioned in the article is, given that there is a restraining order, it's supposed to go into effect in July of this year, which would be and it was going to be a fiasco already. It got fiascoer, if that's a word, a bigger fiasco since then, and I will explain that in just a second. But this is kind of thought of as a hedge because the belief is that the restraining order will prevent it from going into effect anyway. But if it doesn't, this will take care of it. It's as the person, I believe it's the head of the Financial Services Committee too, that actually introduced it. As he said, we introduce thousands of bills and only 400 typically wind up going to a vote. So this is far from a done deal. He also said it wasn't like we're making this go away. We're making it go away for now, and then we can have a real meaningful conversation and do it in a more rational fashion. But
yeah, and I think that I think that they also have, you were mentioning this in our little pre-conversation here, but they inadvertently put folks who are the folks they're there to represent in a bad position too, right?
Yeah, that's the irony of it is, and this is just the way it played out, is the America's Credit Unions, the Illinois Bankers Association, the America's Bank, all the trade organizations filed a lawsuit to stop this because they said it basically was an unfair preemption of federal law, the Banking Act, et cetera, et cetera. And the judge said, you're right, this is a problem. That's why they issued the restraining order, keeping it from going into effect for national banks. Now, what's interesting is technically credit unions are not currently exempted. The Illinois Credit Union League filed additional information to try to make it clear because the foundation on which the restraining order was issued had to do with the Banking Act, not the Credit Union Act. The Illinois Credit Union League is confident credit unions will be taken care of on this, but not necessarily Illinois state-chartered financial institutions. So suddenly they passed a law that's going to wind up putting national banks in a better position than the banks that are chartered by their own financial regulatory agency. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, this is just new information and something that's in the works. We're still waiting to see how it's going to play out long term, but I think maybe, just maybe, some more rational kind of thought is starting to seep into the process.
Interesting. Well,
Speaking of rational thought, I mean,
yeah.
this is another one of these things where, God, my gosh, this news just popped into the kind of the general stream of consciousness on Sunday. What was that? The 26th. Here we are 5 days later recording this. And it just upended the world. What NVIDIA stock lost 17% on Monday based on this news,
Which was a bingo card thing, if I remember right.
Yes. And we'll talk more about that, or at least post some information. We joke about what do we have on our bingo card, and one of the things we had was NVIDIA stock drops at some point this year by 10%. Now, we didn't see it happening because some heretofore unknown small player in the generative AI space out of China suddenly built a better mousetrap. But there you got it.
It's not that they've built a better mousetrap.
Okay,
let's dig in on that a little bit.
Yeah, you take it from here. We've said.
Well, first of all, I've listened to like 3 podcasts on this, watched a lot of videos, and read a lot of stuff. But I'm going to give most of the credit for what I'm about to say to a fantastic podcast, which I've alerted you to many times. I actually downloaded DeepSeek and I tried to use it for something, which I'll share a little bit about.
Hold on a second. You never said which. You were giving all these props to this podcast. You didn't mention.
It's Hard Fork. It's Hard Fork. Check out Hard Fork.
Yes.
Yeah. So Hard Fork. Go ahead.
I think you also told me that DeepSeek is currently the #1 download in the Apple Store.
It is. I sent you a screenshot. It is over ChatGPT. It's above it. Which I guess we shouldn't be surprised. Seems these days that Chinese apps are usually #1 in this store. What did we have last week? Was Red Note before everything hit. Don't forget, we're just it's just one crisis after another of whatever. So, anyways, what has happened? Well, what's got our attention and why we're doing this podcast is because a company announced an AI model, and they put a white paper out there, and they basically said, we built this model using literally, hundreds of millions of dollars less than anything that's ever been done in America. However, but we also did it on American chips, and we'll get to that. And by the way, not only did we build this model on the cheap, but we believe, based on our rubrics, and I just like the word rubric, I'm actually working on a credit union rubric for models that I'm going to share. It's going to be one of my posts this year, and also possibly one of our detailed documentation as they go through models. But they did this rubric which tests it, silly things like how many times does the word or letter R appear in a strawberry? You'll see that one a lot, which is for some reason difficult for these things to answer. And it is outperforming the giant, incredible model that is being used by ChatGPT, that's running on, presumably hundreds and thousands of servers to do inference. And so those are the two things. And let me kind of just break this down. Okay, there's training, right? And the way training works is you get a whole bunch of data and you run this big giant thing, and it needs a whole lot of horsepower, at least we thought it did. And out pops this model, which is a large file, usually like 8 gig, 10 gig, sometimes 42 gig. And the more data, or the smarter it is, the bigger that file is. And so they produced one called DeepSeek. And they did this last year, and it got some attention. And they're a Chinese company that they're not like at the level of Alibaba or ByteDance or Baidu. They're not those kinds of guys. They're just a company that wanted to do this. They went out and got some good people from their schools and whatnot. And they're just guys that like tech. That's what we hear. So what that translates to is the Chinese government wasn't really paying attention to them. And by the way, there's some background for that. For instance, the CEO of ByteDance used to, I guess, post on Chinese social media all the time, we should have free speech and stuff. And then one day he posts, I've been wrong. I was wrong about everything I said. And I apologize for what I said. And because his platform got so big that clearly the Chinese government got involved. So they actually go on. So they produce this first one. It's a good model. It doesn't rock anybody's world. But then in January, last week, they produced what's called R1. Now, you may remember hearing this R1 moniker. So DeepSeek R1. Where have we heard that before? Well, That was what ChatGPT or OpenAI set out and said, hey, we have something called R1, and they produced a model. And I believe that the model, if you pay for it, by the way, there are several ways to get this information, but the R1 model, its purpose is that it will do reasoning. And what that means is that you'll get think out of it. You'll get to see, like, for example, if you ask it a question and you'll see its thought process. And so you say, it's kind of like if I say, hey, Glenn, what's the current Fed rate for whatever? In your head, you would have a little list of things like, oh, I got to go to this website for John and probably take a look. And I wonder which rate he's talking about. It's probably this, knowing John. And you sort of figure out what I want and you deliver it back to me.
So what
But
I'm hearing,
I don't get
it's a little like you asked me the question, hey, what's the Fed funds rate? Show your work.
Yes, it shows your work. Yes, that's exactly it, which is new. And it was something that's very different from, say, the ChatGPT models that are elsewhere. So, but what really blew people's minds was they produced a paper. And that paper said, we built this thing and trained it for under $6 million. And to give you some order of scale, and nobody really knows the numbers of what it costs to train, say, OpenAI's 4.0 model or their O1 model, which is actually the reasoning model. Nobody really knows what it costs to train those, but the estimation is, anywhere somewhere above 400 or $500 million, right? And these guys managed to produce something that is on par in terms of performance and what it's capable of with what these guys spent $500 million on for $5 million. Let that sink in for a minute. Now, what does that mean? Well, what have you been hearing all around the country? As a matter of fact, we talked about this at our last Innovation Club meeting. We talked about the power that it takes to run these things. And so, that there's data centers being built all over the country, and some in small towns where, they just need enormous. Well, the belief is we need enormous amounts of power.
Well, it's why 3 Mile Island's being turned back on, right?
Right, exactly. Yes. So what did they do? What did they do differently, and why was it so cheap? Well, the first thing you need to know is that we have a restriction on companies like NVIDIA on the chips that they can send to China, which what it means is we created these chips here in America, and the best of the best chips have to stay here because we don't want our biggest global competitor to outdo us, right? And you look at GDP, I think China or US GDP is something like 36%. China is the next one at 14, right? So they are definitely our closest global competitor in terms of that. So we only give them these kind of like it'd be like we're keeping all the Ferraris for us, but we're going to send you some good Camrys. Here's a Camry for you. As many of these Camrys as you need. So, oh, by the way, we're going to limit the number of Camrys. We're not even going to give you that many of them. So these guys wind up with a chip. It's called H800, which is a reasonably good chip. It's not a bad chip, but it's certainly not the giant, incredible inference chips, the state of the art that's being used by OpenAI and Google and Anthropic and all of these other big players. So they were saddled with these chips. That's all they had. And as you know, oftentimes necessity is the mother of invention.
That's the phrase that keeps coming in my mind. Here's what I got to work with. Let's figure out a way to make it work. It's
right.
The cooking competition where you got to go to a roadside truck stop and buy your ingredients to come up with like some gourmet meal.
Now, I'm going to give you a little background, and I don't know 100% technically if this is it because people are still looking into it. But what I suspect happened is this. Many years ago, NVIDIA, who was a game card maker, and that's all they did. They just made graphics cards for your nice PCs that would run the fast video games that the kids and the millennials wanted to play, right? That was their big thing. But people noticed that people were using it very early on, that the GPUs would outperform CPUs, right? GPU being a graphic processing unit, whereas a CPU is the central processing unit. The GPUs would outperform the CPUs to do this kind of AI work. And rather than sort of just go, okay, well, that's an alternate use case for my chips, what NVIDIA decided to do, the CEO, was lean into it. And he created something called CUDA. And let me remember what CUDA stands for. Hang on. But what CUDA was, is it was a program or a software that was to help people, to actually help people do this kind of stuff, like, do AI stuff. And so, the idea was that he was sort of leaning into it. And by the way, nobody thought this was a good idea for NVIDIA. Nobody thought, hey, you shouldn't be like wasting your effort on this. But it stands for Compute Unified Device Architecture. And it was an API model created by NVIDIA and allows the developers to use the GPUs to create, general processing stuff, which mostly has been used for AI, but also blockchain. That was another big use case for it, was blockchain, because it's good at dealing with the large numbers that you would need for Bitcoin and other things. With me so far?
Yes.
So you have these H800s, and presumably you have the CUDA software. What I think happened, or at least the whisperings I hear when I read these articles, is they said, well, we can't do anything with the chips, right? Because they're already made. If you crack them open or do anything to them, they're not going to work, right? I don't think I don't think they went in and modified the hardware. What I think they did was they threw out this CUDA architecture, or modified it in a way to build their own, and they found a way to make it. From what we're seeing at this point, it's the amount faster that it is pretty unbelievable. It's 50 to 100 times, or 20 to 50 times cheaper in terms of the power that it uses to train the same model. Now, that's just one aspect of it. So what that means is we're creating all these big data centers everywhere, or that's what I think investors thought, which caused the crash. Like, hey, we're not going to need all this incredible hardware. We don't need to build a rocket that's capable of light speed if we got no planets to go to. You know what I'm saying? If there isn't a need for it, then why do it other than just to do it?
We sure don't need, we still need NVIDIA chips, but we don't need nearly as many as we thought we did.
Right. That was the thinking. However, and what I said before still holds. There are two parts to this. There's the training, right? Which, the New York Times is suing OpenAI, as are a lot of other companies, because their data was used in the training of OpenAI. And this is right, this is ironic, right? There was a note today that said OpenAI thinks that DeepSeek used their stuff to train theirs. How ironic is that?
I did not see that. That's good.
Yeah, that came out today too. So I think Sam Altman actually said it in a tweet or something. But anyways, so long story short, it gets noticed by Satya, who I think what is his last name? Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who has a great book, by the way. I highly recommend everyone read his book, hit refresh. But he notices it, and he goes, "Hey, these, because the OpenAI cats in them, they're not on, they're not in the greatest connection." Which, by the way, just today, Microsoft took the DeepSeek model and put it into their core cloud system called Azure. Really? And so now that Chinese model is in Azure as of this morning. Yep, I'm on top of it, man. That's what you get for driving around. You can just listen to the news. So, anyways,
this morning being, just to be clear, because this will go on a couple days later.
Yeah, January
31st, right?
Okay, so there's the training. Now there's the thing that's called inference, and what inference is when you actually get the model to tell you something, right? So that's when you go in and say, like you said, can you go get me the rates, the most current rates from the Fed, right? That's inference. That means that you still need all these GPUs to go do all this stuff. So I don't think personally that this big freak out was as necessary as the folks think they are, because I still think we need all this horsepower, because that's training one model to be used many times. And the inference for all these people that are going to use AI, and by the way, that number just keeps climbing, is going to need a lot of horsepower. So inference is when you run the model. But DeepSeek did something else, which is really crazy. So OpenAI does not have any open source models, right? Neither does Anthropic, really. Google has chosen to release their models, but only smaller versions of them. Their Gemma model has been released. And the other one, the big player in the released models, is Meta. And Meta's open source model, so they trained a model and they just give it to you for free. Here's a model. You can, if you have the hardware to run this, you can run it. And what's interesting about these models is they work sort of kind of like, I don't know, I was trying to come up with a good analogy, but they're as good as the car you run them on. So they'll still work. They're just, the slower your laptop or the slower the hardware, the slower they respond and they do inference, but they work unless you don't have enough memory. But for the most part, they'll work. So you can run these things locally, right? Well, the guys from DeepSeek also made their stuff open source, which that also caused the freak out, right? Because not only did they build a model that is capable of keeping up with the flagship model of the most prolific AI company that's ever existed, OpenAI, but they're also giving it away. Here you go, which is why it's in Microsoft stuff, which is why it's out there on Olama, which is why it's one of the #1 apps on the App Store, because now it can be run open source. So someone could make an app. I presumably could make an iOS app. And if I wanted to pay for the hardware up in the cloud of either Oracle or Azure or Google or AWS, Amazon's system, I could make an app and sell it to people. So thing is that right now this thing's free, from what I can tell on the App Store, which, by the way, I can't even get in it. That's how popular it is. I downloaded it. I've been trying to get in it just here and there all day, and it keeps like fighting me. So, but once I get in, I was going to try to send you, oh, looks like maybe, nope, still got an error. I want to do some screenshots to show you. But
well, if we get the screenshots in time, we'll post them as part of the as part of the show notes. Yeah, the other thing two things come to mind. In terms of, you think people freaked out more than they needed to. Some evidence of that is, who knows what happens in the next few weeks, but Nvidia stock seems to have bottomed out. It fell below 120, I think, to like 117. It's back up to about 125 as we speak, which is still down significantly. It's no longer down 10% for the year, where it had been. So it seems like after that first day of, I'll call it overreaction, we've moderated to some extent. The other one, I'm curious if you have a take on this, because this really surprised me, is after all this news came out, suddenly I'm reading that OpenAI is raising more funding, and the valuation that they're doing it at in terms of the overall value of the company is actually up further. So I would have thought that based on this, that they don't have quite that open road ahead of themselves without competition. The fact that someone's still willing to actually value their company, I think it's now $340 billion. I was a little surprised by that, especially with the noise going on right now. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I saw that as well. And, they may know something we don't. Again, much like Roger Grimes said about Google and their quantum breakthroughs, there are things we may not know. And so one of the things that was sort of out there today was, again, Friday, January 31st, 2025, was Elon has said, no, they have access to the best chips. They just, don't want to say it. Or they know they're not supposed to have it, so they didn't say it. Well, then why publish a white paper on it? But so that remains to be seen as to whether or not this is really true. But for the most part, from what I've seen, the major people, I can't imagine Nadal, Satya going out and saying what he said on public media with like that without him having known what was done there.
Let me ask you. I just want to test this. Maybe I'm not fully understanding this. I'm remembering cold fusion. I'm thinking like an academic kind of thing where someone claims that they've accomplished something, but then when nobody else can replicate it, it kind of crumbles. So we've got open source access to this model, and it seems to be holding up. But is the difference that we've got the model after it's been trained, so we don't know exactly how they trained it, so they might be lying about how much effort it took to train? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and then that's part of it, and that's exactly right. We have the end result, and the end result they said they created with these tools. However, the end result sure looks like it was created with the same. It's better than the ones created with the better tools. Yeah. So, but they also produced a white paper, and my belief is that most of these outlets that are talking about this would not just go out and say this without having some technical review of the white paper. And it's my belief, and I have not had a chance to go over the white paper. And even if I did, I am not smart enough to really to figure out if it's really true or not, because it's a lot of proofs and math. But people smarter than me presumably have looked at it.
Did they have time? I mean, I doubt they were sitting on the white paper for 3 weeks before they released it. I mean, maybe that's the next shoe to drop. You know, have people really had the chance to really stress test that white paper?
Well, that's the thing, right? So, and that's what I just heard was apparently Alibaba, and this came out like a couple hours ago, has said, "Yep, we just did what they did, and now we have one even better than theirs." But I haven't seen a ton of news on that, but that's what's out there, the Chinese media kind of in the ether right now that seems to be floating around. I think that'll get more.
The free press of the Chinese media, like you said, the guy who suddenly had to back off of everything he had.
who would be very happy if, you know, they were able to tumble our stock market. Of course, I don't know if they would, to be honest with you. That's a great question.
Let me go back.
I'm not 100% that's the case.
I want to read this really quickly because this is another one, and I'll post a link to this. This was the single most kind of mind-blown thing that I've seen. And again, you can argue, okay, who had information when? But The Economist, my favorite magazine, I didn't see this because I still read the print edition, but my friend actually tipped me off to it when it first came out, and then I waited and saw it when my copy arrived. But this whole news around the breakthrough with DeepSeek broke on Sunday the 26th. I'm holding a copy of their magazine. I'm told this article actually was posted back on Thursday the 23rd, and pretty much by definition had to be written before that. The headline is Chinese AI catches up. And they don't, and it's actually the piece about DeepSeek's actually buried in it. But let me just read this one passage I thought was really interesting. Chinese LLMs, large language models, Chinese LLMs are not the very best, but they are far cheaper to make. QWQ, owned by Alibaba, an e-commerce giant, which I'm guessing is what you're just referring to now, John, was launched in November and is less than 3 months behind America's top models. Well, I guess those 3 months went away in a hurry. DeepSeek, whose creator was spun out of an investment firm, ranks 7th by one benchmark. It was apparently mined using 2,000 second-rate chips versus 16,000 first-class chips for Meta's model, which DeepSeek already beats on some rankings. So this was before this, bombshell that came out on Sunday.
Yeah, that was before the R1 release. The R1 release is what blew everybody away because they had a model out there.
So, I mean, I just think this cautionary tale. It's a full-page article that was, I thought, very well laid out. Was written just before this whole thing kind of blew up.
Well, and that goes back to, and it's funny because to my mind, you're the first person. I talked about this the other day, and the first thing you said was you compared it to the Sputnik moment. For those of you that aren't space freaks, and during the space race when we were all in the, everybody in the world was, focused on, we're going to get to the moon, we're going to launch, we got to get stuff in space, because if we don't get stuff in space, then Russia's going to get stuff in space and they'll be able to spy on us or shoot us from space or whatever the stuff was. And then we were working hard. We've blown up a lot of rockets. And all of a sudden, Russia makes the announcement about Sputnik, which sort of upended our entire space race. Yep. And this, this is kind of what people are saying is this is our Sputnik moment. I don't know about that.
I hate to see myself. I don't. It's both a good blessing and a curse, maybe, that my brain's working along the same lines as Mark Andreessen. But yeah. I saw that he's used that same analogy too. I had not seen that at the time that I said it, so I'm not sure who got there first, but we got to the same place.
Right, and so what ended up is this definitely sent sparks down everything, but yet, so, and I haven't done it yet, but I plan on it. Once I can get into the app, which apparently it's so busy being used right now, I cannot get logged into it. But if you ask it about Tiananmen Square, it just says, hey, I don't know what you're talking about, as is, classic sort of revisionist, history with regard to the Chinese government. They see those things very differently. And it makes it interesting because what's kind of come to my mind is these models tend to have boiled information into them. And so now if that, at some point, does that become like, how do we does that become the record of what's happened of history in the sense of whatever's boiled into whatever this model is, and how does that work into things, which I thought was curious.
This history is written by the winners, right?
Right. And then I saw another level that said, oh, by the way, well, it's got good guardrails for it's got great guardrails for, like, if you're trying to avoid being a Chinese dissident. It does not have great guardrails if you want to use it to, say, create a bomb or something. And so that's curious as well. I just sent you a link. It's now on. It's going to be in Copilot.
I see.
It's already on Azure, and it's already on AWS, which is the Amazon version of it. And then, like I said, there was a quick article that says, oh yeah, Alibaba, was able to basically confirm. And you got to think that a whole bunch of people are confirming this. Yep, here it is. It was from PC Gamer. It's the most cheapest, powerful, most everything is chatbot. So now they're saying that, maybe this one. So it's interesting. So I did some testing with it. I'll close on this. I did some testing with it. So I am currently working on some platforms that run locally, and that's why I have, the open source works well for me, where I am trying to match up core fields. For those of you that work with all these different companies, Scimitar and whatnot, I've just been building a model that its purpose is to take fields from all the various credit union cores that I know of, and I'm just the standard ones that are out there in the ether that everybody knows about, and just match them up to CUFX standards. For those of you that don't know CUFX, it's a credit union standard against data that can be used to model data, and it would be useful to have some stuff. And I thought, okay, does this thing know CUFX? And the answer is that yes, it does. Is it capable of me saying, okay, these are dumb fields, I'm just using this as a test. Name, right? Where does that go? Well, it's account.name, right? But can it zoom that stuff out? And I used the DeepSeek model, and I gave it a big long prompt that basically said, you are this. You're trying to just match some of these fields, these standard fields, to the CUFX fields. It's part of that rubric I was telling you about, because I'm also asking it things about the NCUA and the rules, because nobody has a credit union rubric. And I was thinking, we need a credit union rubric to test these models. It's great that it can do the math and whatnot, but what about the things we needed to know if we're going to use it? And so I started working on that. I'm going to publish something around that. So that's what I was working through, and I did some testing on it, and I got to say, the damn thing works pretty darn well. And I went out and I bought a Mac M4 Pro. You can get these little ones for about $1,000, like their fastest chip that they have. And I just dedicated it to this purpose, and I'm impressed. It's running pretty well.
And this, to me, this is a great way to end, because I think it ends on a positive note. And you and I talked about this earlier. This sounds so dire, but we both kind of compared notes, and we kind of came out at the same place. And I've heard a few other people who are kind of close to the credit union AI world as well. At the end of the day, this may actually be something of a net positive for the credit union.
Yes. Well, and for a lot of folks.
We've talked about the fact that, we're of the belief that, these general models are not the future in terms of commercialization. It's these sector-specific vertical models. So if you can actually build the foundational stuff cheaper, the value add stuff that we can really provide that sits on top of that can be the greater focus without the same infrastructure cost. Am I thinking about that right?
Yes, I think you are. I think, and it reminds me of this. It was like about 4 years ago, and people were asking me all the time, where are all these fintechs coming from? How can they afford to do this? And what it was the cloud computing infrastructure continually being reduced, right? So if you wanted to start a fintech that dealt with that, you'd have to have your own data center, and that started off in the millions, so that really prevented players from getting in. And then the next step was data centers came down a little bit. Servers became virtualized, and so that brought it down. Instead of the millions, it was the half millions, and a few more people came in. And then the cloud was invented, and that further reduced the cost. And now anyone could, you could start a fintech startup tomorrow just with, an Azure account or an AWS account or an Oracle account. I think that this model training is going to be the same sort of thing, but it appears to be on this, a hyper cycle.
Like everything, every cycle's faster than the last one. I think you make a great point. The barrier,
and there's actually a name for it. that they talked about on Hard Fork. I want to say it's the Jeopard. It's like Moore's Law, but it's the Jeopard something or other. I have to look it up. See if I can find it. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say. I mean, it just like I say, everything is going faster, and it's like barriers to entry. I mean, the biggest barrier to getting into the space, like you say, was the fixed cost investment. Well, that just got obliterated over the course of however long it going back. And it wasn't that long ago that I remember that, banks were saying, "Oh my God, we're never going to put things in the cloud. Are you crazy?
Are you crazy? That seems nuts. Why would we ever
now
put
it's like,
anything in the
cloud?
cloud?
Why would we not have it in the cloud? I mean, just
Yeah, what kind of weirdo would do that, right? And so, and here we are where, and there are some people, by the way, who still won't do the cloud. And, those guys don't blow up, when things like, what was it about in December when we had the big issue with Microsoft where everybody woke up and their system wouldn't log in, right? So
there's upsides and downsides to everything, right?
But no, they got hit too, actually, because there was a patch. So I'm trying to find this this thing here that they're talking about. I can't remember if it was in this one, but it really did sort of it encapsulated this idea that AI is sort of making everything go a lot faster. Yeah, so OpenAI says there's evidence that DeepSeek distilled its models. So one way you can jumpstart your model training is if you start with another model. So,
I was going to say that was one of the things I've read as well, is that the $6 million was like deceptive.
And that was the point I was making about the New York Times thing about the funny, the irony of, them having done that,
Good point.
So in closing, what does this all mean? At the moment, I wouldn't put a ton of, I wouldn't put a ton of stock in everything right now. I think it's a bit too in flux. I would, I wouldn't run out and do anything dire like divest stocks or buy stocks or anything. I think I would wait for this to play out a bit more.
I was going to say, from a credit union standpoint, I mean, one of the things, well, first off, may you live in interesting times. And
we certainly are.
For the second thing, I mean, we've been bullish on the notion of the opportunities that artificial intelligence, provides. I don't think anything here changes the go forward approach. Like you say, the same thing. Don't go liquidating your portfolio right now. Don't change your plans either, because I mean, unless you were planning on going out and buying a data center or something, or investing.
Yeah, for credit unions, this changes nothing.
Yeah,
it makes it to me. It just makes more of a case, right?
Yeah, because it means that it could be the best case scenario that you keep doing this stuff, and the fundamental cost of doing it may drop. This is kind of
right.
That's another comparison. Now that I think about it, this could almost be like cold fusion for AI.
Yeah, it really could, and it may have that net effect. But the other thing too to remember is that all of this was still built. What they've done is they've taken an innovation from here in the States and they've built on top of it. The thing that's bothering everybody, and you referenced it earlier, was we like to have a year to, at least 6 months, if not a year, head start on our global competitors. And these guys look like they just almost instantly caught up. And Nobody likes to see that because it worries them in a big way. And, I get it, but I think you have to sort of expect it. And I also think that if you again, we'll just end it with what I think we started off with. Necessity is the mother of invention, and that necessity has now created the #1 iOS app. Second time in this month that a Chinese app has been at the top of the iOS App Store.
I bet you that first one is totally dormant at this point. I mean,
yeah, I think it's gone.
Talk about a supernova.
Yeah, because everybody came back to to TikTok. So because it's out there again.
Haven't heard any talk about that now for a week.
Hey, we should start a GoFundMe and see if we can all buy TikTok. If you want to put in, let me know. We'll just put something up there, and instead of letting anybody own it, we'll just grab it. And honestly, I think Glenn would be great to run it. We'll just let him run the TikTok. He understands it so well, I think, probably, and he enjoys TikToking, right? So
Never spent a moment on TikTok, and I'm actually kind of proud to say it. Although I do occasionally ask my daughter or my wife to pull something up. My wife deleted it and then quietly got back on. And one point, I just asked her, "Oh yeah, I thought I got off, but I didn't." So,
Well, with that in mind, necessity being the mother of invention, you found a way to look at TikTok without having to download TikTok. Called your wife. Everybody finds a way, Glenn. It's like Jurassic Park. Nature finds a way.
And it's your necessity to get back on the road.
It is. So if you're looking for me, I'll be somewhere between here and Tennessee. So, all right, everyone. Thanks so much.
Or you'll be at big-fintech.com or on LinkedIn.
Yep, you can find me there, and soon to be on our new BlueSky server, which I'm going to get that out there.
We've been teasing.
I'm excited about it too.
I can't wait to see more about that one. Coming soon.
It's coming. Coming soon. Just like Chinese AI. Coming soon to an iPhone near you.
You're the snake.
All right. Hey, Glenn, take it easy. Glenn, they can find you at the same place, big-fintech.com.
Exactly.
And
LinkedIn.
Yeah, this year's shaping up to be pretty exciting. I'll be seeing you at GAC, so super excited, and we'll get this all on the road and probably have more to even talk about while we're there.
No doubt at all. Thanks to everybody for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big Fintech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.